Hello, I'm Alex Pock, music director of Esprit Orchestra, and I have with me Adam Scime, composer extraordinaire, and Véronique Mathieu, violinist extraordinaire. And we have to discuss, among other things, the music and performance, etc., the whole idea of relationships. I think that's something very special that belongs in the conversation we're going to have today, because Adam and I developed a certain relationship as composer and conductor, and Adam developed a relationship with Véronique Mathieu as violin soloist in the work that you have heard, Afterglow. So perhaps Adam and Véronique, you can talk a little bit about how your knowledge of each other's artistic endeavors came about.
Yeah, I just remember witnessing an incredible musician, artist, and hoping to work with that artist one day. And yeah, 10 years later, we've been through a number of projects, which is so wonderful. I can't state enough how important it is for a composer to have someone that's willing to champion your music in such a wonderful and meaningful way. It's just such a gift, and definitely don't take it for granted, especially someone as gifted as Véronique. We've not only written music, but we've performed together before, which is, I think, a special thing. We, in the 21C festival, we performed in the Canadian premiere of an Andreessen piece, which was,
that's right, yeah,
it was really neat. So we've been around the block a few times, I guess you could say. And obviously, Alex, my relationship with you and Esprit has been quite special. Again, a gift for a composer to have, three orchestral pieces commissioned is very, very, very special, rare. So I have to thank you both.
Yeah. Well, perhaps I will talk a little bit about how this piece came about. It's part of a sequence of events that began with a competition at the University of Toronto, whereby I was asked to make Esprit Orchestra available for a student composers competition. And the idea was that out of perhaps 25 student composers submitting works, 6 would be chosen for rehearsal and workshop reading. And Adam was one of the composers that was finally selected for these readings. And he had written a work called Mirage, which I was taken with at the reading session. I thought, this is already something that is worthy of being programmed on an Esprit concert. And within 2 or 3 months, I think, there was a concert already planned, but this piece I thought was short enough for me to just insert it in that program. And from there, I was thinking at that time of ways of evolving relationships with emerging composers so that they could develop their skills over time with Esprit. And as it turns out, I commissioned 3 works over a period of 5 or 6 years from Adam. And they are essentially a triptych, of which Afterglow is the 3rd panel in this triptych. And in a way, this relationship and this way of working with sequential commissions has become a model, and I've been doing that with other composers, and now it's even more formalized, where I have a ongoing strategy where I bring 2 composers in each year, and I commit to having them write a new work in each of 3 subsequent years, so that they build a relationship with Esprit and grow their music. And associated with that, as with Adam, over the time period, they get involved with mentoring projects and other kinds of things that surround the profession of composing. So that's how Afterglow came about. And as I said, it's the third panel of 3 works that I commissioned. Adam, maybe you can talk about the triptych a little bit, and what those pieces are, what they represent, how you thought through a progression.
Right. Well, when we originally had the idea floating around, subsequent to the performance of the piece Mirage that you mentioned, that this might be a thing that we would do over several years. First of all, very exciting, but then as a composer, I had to sit down and think, well, how am I going to approach this? Do the pieces connect in any way? And to me, I thought it would be much more interesting if they did, compared to if they didn't. And I started to develop a harmonic language and a palette of colors that I would explore over the span of the 3 works. And how would that harmonic language change and evolve? So you definitely get certain motifs and a set of harmonies and gestures that are similar but change. And each the first piece is inspired by wave formation in the ocean. The second piece is inspired by land formations, certain land formations, and the third, Afterglow, is inspired by certain phenomena in the atmosphere. So you get this, sea, earth, and sky connection.
And
so,
Véronique is one of the phenomenons of the atmosphere.
well, the violin, absolutely. That's definitely an element in the equation for sure.
So how did the piece develop with Véronique? You were consulted as to, I mean, did you provide some improvised examples of ideas, or did Adam ask you to try this or that? And what were the highlights in terms of, well, maybe difficulties or things that are exceptionally wonderful to you as a violinist?
Well, I think what's great, one of the great things about collaborations that are ongoing with composers is that you really start to get comfortable with the style of writing. So I feel like when Adam brings me a piece, I have a sense of what he's expecting or maybe what he has in mind. So it makes it, I don't want to say it makes it easier, but it's easier for an artist to connect with the music if you're already familiar with the language of the composer. And as Adam was writing the piece, he did send me a few examples to play back, and we had a couple back and forth sessions. But ultimately, I had total faith that he would come up with a great piece, which he really did. And I think it was a great culmination of the collaboration that you had with the 3 pieces as well. And it really brought something different with having a solo instrument in that context.
Yeah, well, there certainly is a coherence between one piece and the next in the progression. And this work, Afterglow, in the example that we have online here, it's just such a wonderful moment when the violin solo emerges from these other textures and the flow of textures and colors, and then this exquisite violin material emerges from it. It really does have a sense of light in a way. I mean, Adam, how do you try and capture the things that you describe as what Afterglow is? First of all, talk about a little bit about that, what Afterglow is in the physical realm, but then how do you capture it in music? Like, how do you transfer it into sound?
That's a good question, and for each piece, I did it in a different way. I think with the first piece, it was much more the first piece in the triptych. It was much more technical. It was much more of a rigorous process. Whereas the triptych progressed, it became more intuitive, I would say. But still, there are some rigorous approaches. But Afterglow being one phenomenon that inspired the piece, the dominant phenomenon, I guess you could say, of particles scattered in the atmosphere, that when the sun is going down, you get this cascading effect in the sky that is very appealing to the eyes, you could say. And so to answer your question, how do you translate that into the piece? Well, that's a very good question. I think it's a combination of, what I mentioned, certain technical aspects. The harmony that I'm working with tends to be quite bright and colorful, so that already is in place. But I think it's a combination of certain technical aspects, the intangible notion of inspiration that come together to create a harmoniousness that makes the piece. So there's certain aspects that I could point to that are very specifics, and then there are certain aspects that, to me, this is how I hear the aspects that I was working with. And I should add that just to jump off what Véronique was saying, I know her playing so well at this point. We've worked on a number of projects, and it really was a treat to write for her with orchestra. Now, that's not to say that I don't want to challenge her as a performer as well, and I'm sure Véronique would agree with that in certain pieces. But it's so nice that you can work with a performer where you know they're playing so well.
And Véronique, as you played the piece, did you feel like you were floating through textures and atmospheres, or were you too focused on?
No, I would agree with that.
Did you ever get to the point where, like, you felt that you were in this other world as a performer?
It really did. The textures worked really well to have that sense of floating over with the high register, and I think, as we all know, there's not a lot of time once we get to the actual rehearsals with the orchestra. So there's not. I always wish I had more time to just feel comfortable and really hear everything that is happening in the orchestra, for sure. And I think that's probably one of the challenges of working on a piece like that without having heard the orchestra part and how it's going to all fit together, because there's really only a quick turnaround to be able to adjust with even balance, or like for me, sounding point, or how I'm gonna want to play to fit really with the texture in the right way. But I can totally see how Adam was looking at the layering of the textures with the violin as the highest floating angel, if I may say.
Mm-hmm. Very good. So what kinds of projects have you got lined up now? I mean, either individually or working together. Véronique, you're living in the west of Canada now and teaching?
That's right. Yes, I'm in Saskatoon right now, and I spend part of my morning plowing snow because we are in the middle of a blizzard. Yes.
Oh wow.
Yeah, it's been a special week. Well, as most people, most of my concerts are postponed until next year. I have a few things in the US happening in the spring. I'm going to be doing the Red Violin Suite with the Regina Symphony in the spring. But sadly, this is one of the very few performances that I have this year.
Yeah.
Adam and I are working on our next project together. So, he's doing most of the work right now, but I have a few projects on the go with composers and commissions and new work. So at least there are some collaborations that are still happening this year.
Well, composers are in fact very fortunate to have someone like you who is really attuned to the needs of new music, interested in new music, and dedicated and committed to playing it so well. So it's just wonderful. And Adam, your projects, what have you got?
Véronique mentioned our next project, which is a set of etudes that she's working on with several composers, and I'll be writing a couple, which is very exciting. Actually, this week I was supposed to have a premiere with the Toronto Symphony. Postpones indefinitely, so looking forward to better times when that will happen. So it's a little emotional this week. The hometown orchestra TSO. It's kind of a special moment. So yeah, I'll look forward to that. But then there's projects on the horizon. There's a possible project involving dance and Baroque orchestra. I won't mention with who yet, but and then a commission from the Penderecki String Quartet with accordion and electronics.
And how, looking back at this piece that we've been discussing, is there any spin-off for either of you in terms of where it took you from there to your next phases? I mean, what came out of it for you in terms of developmental experience or learning or progression? Like, is it, and sorry, go ahead.
Sure. Well, I think for me as a performer, it's been really interesting to have had a chance to work with Adam on so many different types of pieces, because the first time I played his music was an ensemble piece for new music concerts with soprano. And then he did write a work for solo violin and soprano for me, a work for violin and piano. So it's been really interesting to see how he uses the violin in these different settings. And now with this work with orchestra, how I became really, in some moments, a part of the orchestra, and then a little bit more separate as an individual voice, and then coming back together. So for me, it was really, really nice to see how he could use the violin in so many different ways.
Yes.
And I would say, most of the works I had played by him before were technically very challenging. And this one was challenging in different ways, trying to work more with the textures and the different sounds of the violin, perhaps rather than very, very challenging with the left hand, if I can say that, for maybe less of very, very fast passages as in previous works. So for me, it's also making me discover a new side of his writing, perhaps for violin, which has been very, very neat to see develop. Yeah.
And Adam, your spin-offs, because you've gone actually with these three pieces: Rise, Surfacing, Afterglow. There's a progression there. And what's the continuation of the progression, or is there one?
I think with any piece that I write, one of the takeaways among many is a lesson in restraint. And I think that's an important lesson for me as a composer, because I tend to want to do a lot in my music. And I think that's a byproduct of trying to do something different with each piece. And when you're trying to do different things, you tend to try to fit too much in sometimes. And that's an interesting challenge from piece to piece. Looking back and asking myself, what would I do differently? And then mapping that onto the next project. So yeah, a lesson in restraint, I think, is a takeaway. But yeah, and it just made me think when Véronique was talking about the different ways of writing for the violin. I think one reason we like working with each other so much is that we're both string players, and we have a syntax of communication where we just understand certain technical jargon and just the way string instruments work. And I think there's just an ease of communication when we're working together. So that's something that makes the collaborations successful as well.
Right.
But I would also say I think we have a pretty honest relationship. And which is good, because you know, if you really feel strongly about something and I say, oh, it's really hard, doesn't work, like you're going to push me to say that this is really how it should go. And the other way around, if I think perhaps a fifth
No,
down
right.
would work so much better, then you know, Adam will at least consider something I have to suggest. So I think it's been also a very healthy conversation between the two of us, working on new repertoire that we can really be honest with each other.
I think we talked a little bit about perhaps either adapting this piece for a chamber orchestra or maybe even just a new piece. We'll see. I don't know.
Well, we look forward to your new initiatives together and separately. And thank you very much for providing such illuminating discussion about Afterglow and your careers. Thanks. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you.